The moment Matthew Graham saw his ex-wife standing under the white glow of the Cartier sign on Rodeo Drive, his hand stopped halfway to his new wife's back. And then the single father kissed her. Not a greeting. Not confusion. Not polite. Intentional. Slow. Possessive without being territorial. Matthew felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Not jealousy. Not anger. Fear. Because the man kissing Pauline wasn't just any man. It was Marcus Carter. And Marcus never made accidental moves. Rodeo Drive shimmered like it always did, polished glass storefronts, gold lighting reflecting off luxury cars, valet attendants moving with rehearsed precision. Beverly Hills didn't feel like America. It felt like a stage. And Matthew Graham loved stages. His matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom eased to a stop in front of Il Ristorante Divino, the most exclusive dining reservation in the city. A private anniversary dinner. 2 years married to Helen. Press already tipped off. Discretion manufactured into publicity. Helen stepped out first. She was flawless, emerald silk dress, diamond studs, the type of beauty that didn't threaten men. Matthew stepped out next, tailored navy suit, watch worth more than most homes in Los Angeles. The cameras caught them. The headlines would read: CEO Matthew Graham celebrates anniversary on Rodeo Drive. Perfect optics. Helen smiled up at him. Still can't believe you shut down half the restaurant just for us. Matthew adjusted his cufflinks. I like certainty. He always did. But certainty shattered the moment he saw her. Pauline. Standing across the street. Laughing. And then Marcus leaned in and kissed her. Before the billion-dollar valuation. Before Rodeo Drive. Before Helen. There was a one-bedroom apartment in Santa Monica and a company on the verge of collapse. Matthew Graham wasn't a billionaire then. He was hungry. Driven. Sharp. The kind of man who believed the world belonged to whoever could speak loudest in the room. Pauline wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. She worked in regulatory compliance and financial structuring, a field so complex most executives pretended to understand it. Matthew's startup had nearly died during its second year. A federal audit. Regulatory inconsistencies. 3 major clients threatening lawsuits. Investors circling like vultures. Matthew pacing at 2 a.m. This is a disaster, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Pauline sat across from him at their small kitchen table, surrounded by printed spreadsheets and highlighted statutes. Give me the operating history, she said calmly. He looked at her. You don't fix billion-dollar exposure overnight. She didn't respond. She just started working. 3 weeks later, she rebuilt the compliance framework from the ground up. Reorganized financial reporting. Structured a liability firewall. Rewrote vendor agreements. Created a regulatory safeguard model that preempted audit triggers. The audit cleared. The lawsuits disappeared. One investor called it brilliant foresight. Matthew smiled during that meeting. He didn't mention Pauline. It happened quietly. At a private investor dinner in Malibu. A board member asked, who engineered the compliance recovery that saved your valuation? Matthew took a sip of wine. My leadership team executed well. Pauline sat beside him. He felt her go still. That night in their apartment. You didn't say my name, she said. It's optics, Matthew replied. Investors bet on one face. I'm not asking for the spotlight. Then what are you asking for? To exist. He kissed her forehead. You're overthinking this. It happened again. And again. And again. Press interviews where he became the architect of operational resilience. Panels where he described his strategic foresight. Board filings that listed him as primary architect. The patents. That was the breaking point. Pauline found the documentation at 1:17 a.m. Filed under Matthew Graham, Executive Strategic Architect. Her models. Her calculations. Her risk prediction frameworks. Signed solely under his name. When he came home from a late networking dinner, she was waiting at the table. She slid the folder toward him. Explain this. He barely scanned it. The company holds the IP. You filed it under your executive authorship. I'm CEO. You didn't build it. He exhaled sharply. This is how business works. She stared at him. No. This is how you work. He softened his voice. Pauline, investors need clarity. And clarity means erasing me. You're my wife. That doesn't make me invisible. Silence filled the kitchen. Then she said it. I want a divorce. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No shattered glass. Just two people realizing they wanted different versions of power. Matthew assumed she'd fight. She didn't. She asked for minimal assets. A clean separation. One clause. Buried in legal language. In the event of a liquidity event, acquisition, IPO, or capital raise exceeding $200 million, a 12% retroactive equity adjustment shall apply for demonstrable strategic contributions during marital operations. Matthew's lawyer skimmed it. The company isn't anywhere near that, he said. Matthew signed. Pauline signed. She walked out of the apartment with 2 suitcases. Matthew told a friend later. She'll regret this. He believed that. Because he thought she needed him to succeed. The kiss ended. Marcus stepped back, steady, calm. Pauline looked different. Not louder. Not richer. Stronger. Matthew crossed the street before he could stop himself. Helen followed, confused. Pauline. She turned. Matthew. No bitterness in her tone. Just neutrality. Marcus extended his hand. Marcus Carter. Matthew shook it. Firm. Measured. I've heard of you, Matthew said. Single father. Yes, Marcus replied. Proudly. There was something unshakable in his posture. Marcus didn't perform power. He carried it quietly. Matthew looked at Pauline. You look, well. I am. Helen forced a smile. So were we. Matthew noticed the restaurant behind them. Same one. Private entrance. Reserved. His stomach tightened. You have reservations there? He asked. Marcus smiled faintly. We do. Valets began whispering. Press cameras adjusted lenses. Matthew noticed journalists positioning themselves across the street. Odd. This was supposed to be controlled coverage. Helen squeezed his arm. Why are there more reporters? Matthew checked his phone. An email notification blinked. Subject line. Capital confirmation, 400M acquisition finalization. Tonight. The official announcement. He had planned a surprise press toast during dinner. But something felt off. Marcus checked his watch. 3 minutes, he said softly. For what? Matthew snapped. Pauline met his eyes. For the truth. Matthew's pulse quickened. Across Rodeo Drive, the digital billboard flickered. Company logo. Press gathering. Helen's grip tightening. Marcus calm. Pauline steady. And for the first time since becoming a billionaire, Matthew Graham felt like he wasn't controlling the narrative. He felt like he was walking into someone else's design. Before we go further, I want to know something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your state and country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And tell me this. If you built something brilliant and someone erased your name from it, would you walk away quietly? Or would you wait for the right moment? Keep watching. Because the right moment was 3 minutes away. Rodeo Drive didn't usually go quiet. There was always the hum of engines. Always the soft click of heels on pavement. Always the low murmur of wealth pretending not to stare at itself. But something changed in the air. Matthew felt it. A shift. Not chaos. Control. Just not his. Across the street, The massive digital billboard that usually rotated luxury advertisements froze on his company's logo. Graham Strategic Holdings. Helen looked up. "Oh, that's sweet," she whispered. "They're already running the announcement." Matthew didn't respond. Because the timing was wrong. He had planned the press moment inside the restaurant. Controlled lighting. Controlled speech. Controlled applause. This was external. Unscripted. Marcus stood beside Pauline as if he had nowhere else to be. Relaxed. Patient. The kind of patience that only comes from preparation. A PR representative stepped out of the restaurant with a wireless mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out, smiling brightly, "thank you for gathering tonight to celebrate the finalization of Graham Strategic Holdings' $400 million acquisition." Applause scattered through the crowd. Matthew forced a smile. This was still salvageable. Then the PR rep continued. "As part of our commitment to transparency and excellence, Mr. Graham has agreed to publicly release documentation outlining the foundational strategic framework that enabled this growth." Matthew's stomach dropped. He had never agreed to that. Helen leaned closer. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Because at that exact moment, the screens behind them lit up. Not with marketing slides. Not with celebratory visuals. With files. Old documents. Dated 4 years back. Audit recovery reports. Regulatory models. Restructuring drafts. And at the bottom of each one. Prepared by Pauline Graham. A murmur rippled through the press. A journalist squinted at the screen. "Why haven't we seen that name before?" Matthew stepped forward sharply. "This isn't necessary," he said toward the PR rep. She looked confused. "It was authorized, sir." "Authorized." Marcus finally spoke. "You should really read the fine print on the emails you approve." Matthew turned to him. "What did you do?" Marcus didn't smile. "I don't do things. I invest in things." The PR representative continued, clearly unaware she was standing in the middle of a live detonation. "In light of the acquisition exceeding $200 million, a previously filed equity clause has now been triggered." Helen's fingers tightened around Matthew's arm. "What clause?" The screen shifted. A legal excerpt appeared. Highlighted. "In the event of a liquidity event exceeding $200 million, a 12% retroactive equity adjustment shall apply for demonstrable strategic contributions during marital operations." Matthew's heart began to pound. No. That clause had been symbolic. The company wasn't worth anything when they signed. He looked at Pauline. Her expression was calm. Not smug. Not vengeful. Certain. "When did you file this?" he demanded. "The day we divorced," she replied. The PR rep's voice wavered slightly now, sensing tension but continuing. "As of midnight, Pauline Graham will be recognized as 12% equity holder in Graham Strategic Holdings." Cameras began clicking rapidly. Flashbulbs. Journalists whispering into phones. Helen stepped away from Matthew slowly. 12%, she whispered. "Of everything?" Marcus added gently. "Retroactive recognition isn't emotional. It's contractual." Matthew felt the ground tilt. "Benjamin never said." "Benjamin didn't need to," Marcus interrupted. Matthew froze. Benjamin. The private equity titan who finalized the acquisition deal. The one who insisted on restructuring transparency clauses before funding cleared. Marcus continued. When Benjamin's team reviewed historical filings, they saw irregular authorship patterns. Pauline finally spoke. They asked questions. Matthew's throat went dry. "You told them." "I didn't have to," Pauline said softly. "The documents already did." The billboard changed again. Now displaying side-by-side comparisons. Original compliance drafts with Pauline's signature. Later executive summaries attributed solely to Matthew. The similarities were undeniable. A reporter stepped forward. "Mr. Graham, can you comment on why foundational compliance strategy was never publicly credited to Pauline?" Another voice chimed in. Was this an internal oversight? Were investors informed? Helen looked at Matthew. Her face no longer glowing under Rodeo Drive lights. What did you do? He opened his mouth. Closed it. He had built an empire on narrative control. And narrative control had just slipped. Marcus stepped beside Pauline. Not in front of her. Not behind her. Beside. I acquired 18% of public shares last quarter, he said calmly. The press turned. Why? Marcus answered simply. Because value should be recognized. Matthew stared at him. You planned this? No, Marcus said. You did. 4 years ago. The words hit harder than shouting would have. You underestimated the clause, Marcus continued. You underestimated her. You assumed growth would erase history. He gestured toward the screen. But growth magnifies it. Helen's voice was barely audible. You said she handled minor compliance issues. Matthew couldn't look at her. Investors don't like complicated narratives, he muttered weakly. Pauline's gaze softened, not with affection, but with clarity. Investors don't like deception either. Helen stepped back fully now. The distance between her and Matthew visible to everyone. You built this on her, she asked. Silence answered. Pauline stepped forward toward the small podium. The crowd hushed. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone, she began calmly. I came because recognition matters. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. 4 years ago, I built a compliance architecture that prevented this company from collapsing during federal investigation. I built the acquisition roadmap that made tonight possible. She looked at Matthew directly. You called it optics. A quiet ripple of tension passed through the crowd. I called it partnership. Marcus stood steady beside her. Matthew felt something he hadn't felt since his early startup days. Exposure. Raw. Unfiltered. The kind that money couldn't mute. Marcus checked his watch again. Benjamin's restructuring proposal clears in 15 minutes. Matthew's head snapped up. What restructuring? Pauline answered. The one that adds my name to every foundational patent and compliance framework. Matthew's breath caught. You can't retroactively alter executive filings. Marcus replied evenly. Courts disagree when documentation supports it. Reporters scribbled frantically. Phones streamed live. The narrative had flipped. Not violently. Precisely. Matthew looked around. At the press. At Helen. At the glowing billboards. At Pauline. For years, he believed success justified simplification. That singular credit was necessary. That partnership complicated perception. Now the simplification was unraveling him. Helen spoke quietly. Was any of it yours? That hurt more than the cameras. Matthew whispered. Yes. But it didn't sound convincing. Because even he could see the foundation displayed behind him. And her name was on it. Marcus turned to Pauline. He didn't ask permission. He didn't perform for cameras. He simply placed his hand gently at her waist and kissed her. Slow. Certain. Intentional. This wasn't romance for spectacle. It was acknowledgement. The crowd reacted. Not scandalized. Moved. Matthew stood there. Billionaire. CEO. Celebrated. And for the first time, irrelevant. The PR rep, now visibly shaken, concluded. Effective immediately, Pauline Graham will be formally recognized as co-architect of Graham Strategic Holdings' foundational compliance structure. The billboard glowed. Her name remained. Marcus leaned close to Matthew one last time. You built the spotlight, he said quietly. You just forgot who wired the stage. And that line stayed in the air long after the applause began. Rodeo Drive did not return to normal. Even after the cameras lowered. Even after the applause softened into murmurs. Even after the press began dispersing. The air remained charged. Because something irreversible had happened. Matthew Graham was still a CEO. Still standing. But he no longer owned the story. And for a man like Matthew, that was the greater loss. The restaurant staff ushered everyone inside, trying to salvage the evening. What was meant to be a private anniversary dinner became an emergency board huddle. Investors filled the private dining room. Phones buzzed nonstop. Legal advisors were dialing in remotely. Helen walked in beside Matthew but did not take his arm. She chose the chair across from him instead. That distance said more than words. Marcus and Pauline entered last. Not hurried. Not triumphant. Composed. Benjamin's name was mentioned again by one of the investors. He approved this restructuring conditionally, someone said. Matthew looked up sharply. Conditioned on what? The answer came from a senior board member. Transparency. Full historical correction. Or the funding pauses. The room fell silent. $400 million. Paused. Because of pride. Benjamin appeared on the large screen via video call. Calm. Collected. Unbothered. Good evening, he said smoothly. I apologize for the unconventional timing. Matthew clenched his jaw. You blindsided me. Benjamin's expression didn't shift. I reviewed the documents. The misattribution was clear. It wasn't illegal. It was incomplete. Benjamin folded his hands. Growth built on incomplete narratives destabilizes under scrutiny. He looked toward Pauline. Correction restores stability. Matthew leaned forward. So what exactly are you proposing? Benjamin didn't hesitate. Pauline Graham becomes official co-architect of foundational strategy. Her name added to all core documentation. She receives her 12% equity. And she assumes advisory authority on future compliance structuring. Matthew exhaled sharply. You're restructuring my company. Benjamin tilted his head slightly. No. I'm protecting my investment. Helen had been quiet. Watching. Listening. Processing. Finally she spoke. Is any of this untrue? Matthew opened his mouth. Closed it. He thought about denying. Minimizing. Reframing. But the screens outside had shown everything. It's complicated, he said. Helen shook her head slowly. No. It's simple. Her voice didn't crack. That was her work. Silence. And you let the world think it was yours. Matthew tried once more. I built the company. Pauline responded gently. We built the foundation. That distinction cut deeper than accusation. Helen stood. I married a man I thought was self-made. She removed her wedding ring. I didn't realize he was selectively made. The sound of metal touching the table echoed louder than shouting would have. She left. Not dramatic. Not chaotic. Final. Matthew watched the door close behind her. That loss hurt more than equity. Because Helen had believed the image completely. And now she didn't. The room cleared slowly. Investors stepped aside to take calls. Lawyers drafted emergency amendments. Benjamin's screen went dark. Eventually, it was just 4 people left in the private dining room. Matthew. Pauline. Marcus. And the weight of history. Matthew leaned back in his chair. When did you know, he asked Pauline quietly, that you'd win? Pauline didn't hesitate. The day I signed the divorce papers. Marcus watched silently. Matthew frowned. You couldn't have known we'd reach this scale. Pauline's eyes were steady. I knew the model worked. I knew the framework was scalable. I built it to survive growth. She paused. I just wasn't going to survive being erased. That landed. Matthew rubbed his temple. You could have fought back then. I wasn't fighting you, she said. I was protecting myself. Matthew looked at Marcus. You're enjoying this. Marcus shook his head calmly. No. Then why involve yourself? Marcus answered without hesitation. Because I have a daughter. Matthew frowned. What does that have to do with anything? Marcus' voice stayed even. She's 9. Brilliant. Curious. She builds things out of nothing. And I refuse to let her grow up thinking her work belongs to whoever speaks the loudest. The words weren't loud. But they were immovable. I didn't do this for Pauline, Marcus continued. She could have handled it alone. I invested because integrity compounds. So does dishonesty. Matthew felt something unfamiliar. Not anger. Not humiliation. Regret. The lawyer entered quietly with revised documents. The restructuring agreement. All the amendments formalized. Matthew stared at the papers. 12% equity confirmed. Co-architect recognition. Advisory authority. Public statement drafted. He looked at Pauline. Are you going to dismantle everything? She shook her head. I'm going to strengthen it. Why? He asked. Pauline's answer was simple. Because I still care about what I built. That hurt more than revenge would have. She wasn't destroying him. She was fixing what he had distorted. Matthew picked up the pen. Signed. The sound of ink meeting paper felt heavier than the divorce signature 4 years ago. This time, he understood the cost. The night air was cooler now. The crowd thinner. The billboards dimming. Marcus and Pauline stepped outside together. Matthew followed a few steps behind. Not to argue. Not to plead. Just to understand. Was I always like this? He asked quietly. Pauline considered that. No, she said honestly. You were ambitious. Then you became afraid. Afraid of what? That sharing credit would shrink you. He absorbed that. And did it. She looked back at him. No. It would have made you bigger. Marcus opened the car door for her. She paused before getting in. Matthew. He looked up. I never wanted your spotlight. She held his gaze. I wanted partnership. Then she got into the car. Marcus closed the door gently. No theatrics. No triumph. Just completion. The car pulled away from Rodeo Drive. The last reflection of Pauline's face in the tinted glass disappeared into Beverly Hills traffic. Matthew stood alone under the fading lights. No Helen. No cameras. No applause. Still wealthy. Still powerful. But finally aware. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about valuation. He was thinking about value. And how differently those words felt. Weeks later, headlines stabilized. Pauline Graham officially named co-architect. Graham Strategic Holdings restructures leadership. But one quiet article stood out. Marcus Carter expands ethical investment fund focused on transparent founders. In a brief interview, Pauline was asked, "Do you regret leaving?" She smiled. "I didn't leave. I repositioned." That was the real twist. She hadn't waited for revenge. She had bet on herself. And patience paid interest. Matthew still runs the company. Pauline still builds within it. Marcus still invests in integrity. But the narrative is different now. Not because someone fell. But because someone refused to stay invisible. If this story moved you, let me ask you something. Have you ever built something, an idea, a relationship, a career, and watched someone else take the credit? Drop a comment and tell me what state or country you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you believe recognition matters, if you believe integrity eventually catches up with deception, then subscribe. Because here, we tell stories where the truth doesn't stay buried. And sometimes, the spotlight shifts.